3 weeds. That's all it takes. Horsetail, broomsedge, and sheep. Sorrel. If you see any of them dominating a piece of land, the Amish will not sign that deed. They will walk the perimeter, look at the ground, and quietly turn around. In Lancaster County and across the Ohio settlements, families have been reading dirt like this for over 2 centuries. And what those 3 plants tell them can save a buyer $40, $50, even $80,000 in hidden repairs. So why does no realtor ever mention them? Why did the county extension offices stop teaching this? Stay with me, because the answer runs deeper than most people think. Here's where it starts. A young couple in rural Pennsylvania, early 30s, first-time buyers, saving for years, finds what looks like a dream. 5 acres, gentle slope, old fence line, a little pond at the back corner. The listing calls it a rustic country parcel with meadow character. They walk it once. They notice the grass looks a little orange in patches, but the realtor smiles and calls it wildflower color. They sign. 6 months later, they cannot get a garden to grow. Not a single tomato. The pond overflows in spring, and the septic engineer shakes his head at the drainage report. By the end of year 2, they have spent $47,000 on lime, French drains, regrading, and a soil rehabilitation plan that still is not finished. Their neighbor, an Amish farmer 2 properties over, had watched them close the deal without a word. When the wife finally asked him, years later, why he never warned them, he simply said, "You didn't ask, and the ground already told you." That orange grass had a name. It was broomsedge, and to anyone who knows how to read a field, it was screaming. This is the first weed, broomsedge. A tall, wiry grass, cousin to the blue stems, easy to spot in fall when it turns a rusty orange color that catches the light. City buyers see it and think prairie. Farmers see it and reach for the truck keys. Because broomsedge only takes over ground that has been stripped of calcium and pushed into deep acidity. Healthy soil, with balanced minerals and living microbes, does not let it dominate. Broomsedge fills the vacuum left when the land has been overgrazed, overfarmed, or simply neglected long enough that the fertility floor collapses. Here's the part nobody tells you. USDA soil surveys from the Dust Bowl recovery era back in the late 1930s flagged broomsedge-dominated fields as effectively abandoned, not by mistake, by exhaustion. The government field agents of that period could look at a photograph of a pasture and estimate how many years and how many tons of lime it would take to bring it back. The answer was almost always the same. Years. Thousands of dollars. And that is in 1930s money. Translate that forward to today, and you are looking at a rehabilitation cost that would swallow the entire savings most families put together for a down payment. A modern buyer stepping onto a broomsedge field is stepping onto that same problem. The pH is probably below 5. The calcium is gone. The soil biology is suppressed. You cannot just till it under and plant. You have to feed the ground for 3 to 5 seasons before it responds. And in that time, you are still paying the mortgage, still paying the property taxes, still hoping the septic holds. Every spring, you spread lime. Every spring, you send in a soil sample. Every spring, the numbers move a little. And every spring, you wonder if you should have walked away when you had the chance. The old-timers in the Blue Ridge, in the Ozarks, in the Cumberland Plateau, all had a phrase for it. They called broomsedge poverty grass, not because poor people grew it, because it grew where the land had been made poor. It followed cotton fields that had been worked to death. It followed tobacco ground that had been mined for one crop too many. It followed corn rotations that never got rested. Wherever the ground had been asked to give without being fed, the broomsedge came in and took over. It was the visible record of a soil that had been used up. And here is the detail that ought to stop a modern buyer cold. Broomsedge does not just appear on farmland. It appears on any ground where the calcium base has collapsed. Old logging sites, former grazing pastures that were mismanaged for decades, abandoned homesteads, even parcels near old strip mines, where the soil chemistry was disturbed generations ago and never rebalanced. If you are looking at a rural lot and you see broomsedge on the fringes, ask yourself what was happening on that ground in 1940, in 1960, in 1980. The plant is telling you the answer. It just does not use words. That is one weed, and already you can see why an Amish family would walk away. But maybe you are thinking, all right, dry orange grass sounds obviously bad. What about a lush, green, wet-looking field? Surely that is the safe bet. That is the buyer's instinct. Green means alive. Green means fertile. Green means good. Not always. This is where the second weed comes in, and this one is older than the dinosaurs. It is called horsetail. Botanical name, Equisetum arvens. If you have ever seen it, you remember it. Jointed hollow stems, ridged like tiny bamboo, no real leaves, growing in patches that look almost prehistoric because they are. Horsetail is a living fossil. It survived the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. It survived every ice age since. Its ancestors grew in the swamps that eventually compressed into the coal seams we still mine today. Think about that. The plant standing in that corner of the pasture has a lineage older than every mammal on Earth. It is not going to leave your pasture because you asked nicely. 19th century agricultural journals called it the field killer. Farmers in New England, in Ohio, in the mid-Atlantic, all knew what it meant. Horsetail only thrives in one very specific combination of conditions: standing subsurface water, poor drainage, exhausted topsoil, and often elevated levels of silica and heavy metals that its deep roots, reaching down 6 feet or more, pull up from below. The plant is so efficient at accumulating silica that in some regions it was once used to scour pots and polish wood. That is not a plant you want winning the competition for your topsoil. Notice what happens when a modern buyer sees a patch of horsetail. The realtor calls it natural meadow. The listing describes diverse native plant life. The buyer feels like they are getting something wild and beautiful. What they are actually getting is a drainage problem you cannot fix with a shovel in a weekend. To move horsetail off a property, you need to lower the water table. That means industrial regrading. That means engineered drainage. That means tens of thousands of dollars, and often it still comes back. Homeowners in Vermont, in upstate New York, in the Pacific Northwest have spent 5 and 6 figures fighting horsetail infestations, only to watch the plant creep back in after 2 wet seasons. This is why an Amish scout walking a parcel will stop at a single stand of horsetail and consider the whole property compromised. Not because they hate the plant, because they understand what it is telling them about the water underneath. And here is what makes it worse. Horsetail can indicate more than just drainage. Because those deep roots pull up whatever's down there, a dominant horsetail stand on old industrial adjacent land can suggest metals in the water table itself. Nobody is going to tell you that at the closing table. Nobody is going to volunteer that information when you are signing papers. The horsetail knows. But the horsetail does not talk to buyers who cannot read. Think about what that means practically. You buy a rural parcel. You plan to drill a well. The well driller hits water at 50 feet. The flow is decent. The water looks clear. You sign off, you plumb it in, and you start drinking it. What you do not know is that horsetail has been growing on that ground for decades, pulling silica and heavy metals up from below, telling every farmer who walked past that the aquifer beneath was not clean. But the driller does not test for what the plant already told you, and the standard well water panel does not always catch what the plant is warning about. The Amish would not have drilled that well. They would have looked at the ground, walked away, and let the next family learn the hard way. So the Amish don't ask. They just look at the ground and they walk. Now, this is not just individual farmers being cautious. It is a system, a discipline. In Lancaster County, there's an oral tradition passed down through generations called the corner walk. When an Amish family considers a property, they walk to each of the 4 corners, Step 20 paces inward and identify the dominant ground cover in each zone. 4 corners, 20 steps, 4 readings. If 2 or more zones show any of the warning weeds, the discussion is over. They do not need a soil test. The soil test just confirms what they already know. Think about the discipline in that. 20 minutes of walking, $0. A decision made before the seller has even poured the coffee. And a failure rate on Amish rural purchases that, by every anecdotal account from land agents in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and now Kentucky, runs dramatically lower than the failure rate for regular buyers on similar parcels. Land agents who have worked both sides of the fence, English buyers on one side, Amish buyers on the other, will tell you the difference in outcomes is not close. It is not a small edge. It is a systematic advantage that compounds across every purchase a community makes. Anyone can do the corner walk. It is not secret. It is not proprietary. It is just observation. And yet almost no one outside those communities does it. The knowledge is sitting there, free, requiring only that you slow down and look. And most buyers, most inspectors, most agents walk right past it. Which brings us to the third weed, and this one is the most misunderstood of the 3. It is called sheep sorrel, Latin name Rumex acidocella. Small plant, arrow-shaped leaves, reddish tint along the stems, especially in late summer. Most people who see it think it looks kind of pretty, almost decorative. A little ground cover in the corner of a lot, red-edged and delicate. And that is exactly the problem. Sheep sorrel is one of the very few plants on earth that thrives in soil so acidic that almost nothing else productive can grow. We are talking pH 4 and below in serious infestations. That is not just bad soil. That is soil that has been damaged chemically over a long period of time, and it does not get that way by accident. Here's the detail that matters. Sheep sorrel colonies show up with alarming consistency on 3 kinds of land. First, post-World War II, fill sites where developers hauled in unregulated material to level lots. Second, closed or converted industrial parcels, especially anything that used to touch a manufacturing operation. And third, and this is the one that ought to worry every rural buyer, old orchard land that was sprayed for decades with lead arsenate before the practice was finally curtailed in the 1950s. Lead arsenate, that is not a misprint. From roughly the 1890s into the 1950s, American orchards were sprayed with a compound containing both lead and arsenic. It was the standard insecticide of its era. Apple orchards, especially, peach orchards, cherry orchards, millions of acres, over more than half a century, coated in a chemical that left residues we are still finding in soil samples today. The residue does not leave. It sinks into the soil, binds with the mineral fraction, and stays there for generations. And in the disturbed, acidified soil left behind, sheep sorrel finds its perfect home. Now think about how much former orchard land has been quietly subdivided and sold as country home sites over the last 40 years. Think about how many families have built a garden, let their children play in the yard, drawn well water from the ground beneath, without any idea what was under their feet. Nobody told them. Nobody was required to tell them. But the sorrel was there the whole time, in the corner of the lot, red-edged and delicate, telling anyone who could read it exactly what had happened there. Environmental researchers in Washington State, in Michigan, in the Hudson Valley, have documented lead and arsenic levels in former orchard soils that exceed modern residential safety thresholds by factors of 10, 20, sometimes 50. Those studies exist. They are public, but they are not attached to individual property listings. They are not read out at closings. They live in academic journals and state agricultural bulletins that no home buyer is ever going to see. So the parcel gets sold, the house gets built, the garden gets planted, and the sorrel keeps growing, unnoticed, in the corner of the lot, quietly documenting what the paperwork left out. This is the pattern that ought to make anyone uneasy. The knowledge exists, the evidence exists, the plants are visible from the road, and yet the system that moves land from the listing service to the title company is built to look the other way. And here's where it starts to change. Because this knowledge was not always buried. It was not always folklore. There was a time in this country when county extension offices, the same offices that today will not return your phone call about a soil concern, published detailed guides on weed indicators. They handed them out for free at Farm Bureau meetings in the 1940s and 1950s. Broomsedge, horsetail, sorrel, all of it. Named, explained, mapped. Farmers took those pamphlets home, pinned them up in the barn, and taught their sons to read the ground before they ever taught them to run the tractor. And then sometime in the late 1970s, those guides quietly stopped being reprinted. The knowledge did not fail. It did not get disproved. It just stopped being taught. So the question becomes, and this is the question that opens the next part of the story, who benefits when buyers cannot read the ground? To answer that, you have to go back further than most people expect. Because weed indicator science did not start in America. It started in Europe, hundreds of years before the first extension office existed. Medieval land assessors in the German-speaking regions of Central Europe used dominant ground cover as one of the primary tools for valuing farmland. There were no soil labs. There were no chemical tests. There was only observation, memory, and generations of accumulated pattern recognition. If a field carried certain plants, it commanded a certain price. If it carried others, no serious farmer would touch it. Records from monastic estates in the Rhineland show land assessments made almost entirely on visible vegetation, and those assessments held up across centuries of use. When German-speaking Anabaptists, the ancestors of today's Amish and Mennonites, began migrating to Pennsylvania in the 1720s and 1730s, they brought that entire framework with them. Colonial-era land records from Lancaster County show settlement patterns that make no sense unless you understand this. They routinely passed on parcels that looked, on paper, like good deals, and they routinely paid premium prices for parcels that looked, on paper, like nothing special. The difference was what was growing on the ground. Historians who have studied those early records have noted the pattern without always understanding it, but the pattern is unmistakable once you know what to look for. That is 300 years of applied observation, not folklore, not superstition, a functioning land assessment system that predates soil chemistry by centuries, and, in the communities that still use it, outperforms it. So the question sharpens. Why did the rest of America let it fade? The answer, when you follow the timeline, is uncomfortable, because it lines up almost exactly with the period when American real estate stopped being primarily a farming market and started being primarily a subdivision market. In the years after World War II, developers began buying up rural land at unprecedented scale. Some of that land was excellent. Much of it was not. Much of it was ground that local farmers had known for generations was compromised. Too wet, too acidic, too depleted, or too contaminated to farm profitably. But you do not need farmable land to sell a country home site. You just need land that looks nice from the road, green in spring, colorful in fall. A little pond, maybe. A tree line. Something the brochure photographer can work with. And so parcels that the neighbors would not have grazed cattle on started getting rebranded. Bad ground became country living. Wet bottom became waterfront potential. Old orchard became heritage acreage. The vocabulary changed. The ground did not. The system did not require anyone to lie. It just required buyers who could not read the ground. And the fewer buyers who could read the ground, the more parcels moved. Here's where the story turns from suggestive to documented. Because there is a proof object waiting, something that was teased earlier and needs to be brought into the light. In 1949, the United States Department of Agriculture published a bulletin. Its subject was, in plain language, how to read soil conditions by looking at the weeds growing on it. It named broomsedge. It named horsetail. It named sorrel. It laid out, in the kind of practical prose the USDA was known for in that era, exactly what a farmer or a buyer should look for and what each indicator meant. It was distributed to county agents across the country. It was reprinted through the 1950s. It was, for a brief window in American agricultural history, official federal guidance. And then it faded. It was not formally retracted. It was not disproved. It was quietly retired. New bulletins came out on other subjects. The weed indicator material was not updated. It was not rewritten. It was not replaced. It was simply allowed to age out of circulation. The extension offices that had once handed it out at meetings stopped mentioning it. The agents who had learned it in training stopped teaching it to the next generation. Within about 20 years, an entire practical vocabulary that had guided American land buying for a century was gone from public conversation. If you go looking for it today, you can find archived copies. But you have to know to look. And most buyers, most realtors, most inspectors, most homeowners do not know it ever existed. That couple in Pennsylvania, the one that spent $47,000 trying to rescue a broomsedge field, could have known. The federal government literally published this, and nobody handed it to them. Now, this was not just farmer folklore that briefly caught the government's attention. This was academic work, serious work. In the 1940s and 1950s, a soil scientist named Dr. William Albrecht, chair of the Soils Department at the University of Missouri, built an entire framework of soil fertility that treated indicator plants as a primary diagnostic tool. Albrecht argued that soil health and plant expression were inseparable, that what grew on the ground told you what was under it, that you could not understand fertility without understanding the plants the ground chose to grow. His papers filled academic journals. His students carried his framework into extension offices and university programs across the Midwest. For a time, it looked as if American agriculture was about to be reorganized around what the ground itself was telling anyone willing to look. Albrecht's work never disappeared entirely. It stayed influential in organic farming circles and in the emerging soil health movement. But it was pushed steadily out of mainstream extension teaching over the following decades. As synthetic fertilizer sales expanded through the 1960s and 70s, the framework shifted. Fertility became something you bought in a bag. Deficiency became something you corrected with a product. The idea that the land itself was telling you things for free was not a useful message for an industry built on inputs. Not this, but this. Not because Albrecht was wrong, because his framework did not require anyone to buy anything. And a framework that does not sell anything does not get funded, does not get promoted, and does not get taught. It just gets left on the shelf while the trade magazines and the seed catalogs and the fertilizer brochures fill the mailbox instead. This is not a conspiracy in the loud sense. Nobody had to hold a secret meeting. Nobody had to burn the old bulletins. It was simpler than that. Money flowed one way and attention followed. Extension budgets got tighter. Research grants started coming from chemical companies. AG school curricula got restructured around what industry wanted graduates to know. Within a generation, the practical knowledge of reading the ground had been replaced by the practical knowledge of prescribing inputs. And the buyer, walking a parcel with no idea what to look at, was the collateral damage of that shift. Meanwhile, in Lancaster County, none of that mattered. The Amish were not reading extension bulletins. They were not attending university short courses. They were teaching their sons and daughters the corner walk, the way their grandparents had taught them, the way theirs had taught them, going back to the fields of the Rhineland before Pennsylvania was even a name on a map. The system kept running because it never stopped running. And that is why, when the rest of America forgot how to read the ground, the Amish remembered. And the Amish just kept doing what they had always done. They still do. Amish settlements in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and increasingly in Kentucky and Tennessee still walk the corners, still read the ground, still refuse parcels that other buyers snap up because the price looks good. Land agents who work with those communities will tell you, quietly, that Amish buyers almost never end up with the disaster properties. They pay attention, they walk away, and they wait. There's always another parcel. There's always another season. There's no rush that justifies buying ground the plants have already condemned. So what would happen if every buyer did the corner walk? If every family, before signing a deed, spent 20 minutes reading the ground? A lot of bad parcels would stop moving. A lot of subdivisions would have to be honest about what they were selling. A lot of hidden costs would come to the surface before the closing instead of after. The whole rural real estate market would shift, quietly but permanently, toward the buyer. And that brings this back to you, to your property, or the one you are thinking about buying, or the quarter acre behind the subdivision, or the 10 acres you have been saving for, or the retirement lot your family has been circling for years. It works on all of them. City lot, suburban parcel, hunting land, homestead ground. The weeds tell the truth on all of them. 3 weeds, 20 minutes, no cost. Broomsedge for calcium collapse. If you see rusty orange grass dominating a field in fall, the soil has been mined dry. Expect years and thousands of dollars to bring it back. Horsetail for drainage failure. If you see those jointed hollow stems and patches, the water table is against you, and the land may be carrying more than water in it. Sheep, sorrel for chemical history. If you see those small, red-tinged leaves colonizing the ground, ask hard questions about what used to be there. Fill site, industrial edge, old orchard. The ground remembers, even when the paperwork does not. 20 minutes of walking can save you $20,000. It can save you $80,000. It can save you from the kind of mistake that follows a family for a decade. It can save you from the phone call to the septic contractor, from the letter from the well tester, from the slow, sinking realization that the beautiful 5 acres was not what it looked like from the road. And here's what the Amish understand that most modern buyers do not. The land is not silent. It has never been silent. It has been talking the whole time. It just talks in a language most people were never taught to hear. The realtor was not taught it. The inspector was not taught it. The county agent used to teach it and stopped. But the language is still there, growing right at your feet, on every parcel you walk. You are the type of person who notices. You are the type of person who reads to the end. You are the type of person who, next time you walk a piece of ground, is going to look down, instead of just looking around. That is the difference. That is what the Amish farmer meant when he told his neighbor, years too late, that the ground had already told them. It had. They just did not know how to listen. Now here's the natural question. Which of these 3 have you seen on land near you? On your own property? Or one you passed on? Or one you almost bought? Leave it in the comments. Because the pattern only gets clearer when people start naming what they have seen with their own eyes. And once you start seeing them, you cannot stop. You will drive past a field on the way to the grocery store and clock the broomsedge before you finish your coffee. You will walk a neighbor's back lot and freeze at the sight of horsetail in the low corner. You will visit a friend's country place and notice the sorrel creeping along the fence line, and you will suddenly understand why nothing they plant ever really thrives. The eye learns fast. The eye does not forget. And one more thing before you go. Because the Amish do not just look at the weeds, they also look at the trees. There are 3 specific trees they watch for on any parcel they consider. And one of them, one very common tree that grows on properties all across this country, is a quiet signal that the water table is being poisoned, and that the well you are about to drill into may already be compromised. That is the next story, and it is bigger than this one.